games like Acquire. And so I don't know if they took us seriously, but at a moment, there was a moment when Dario De Toffoli, it's an important game journalist today, but at the time he was the owner of a company making games for newspapers. He had the good idea of approaching us because he couldn't understand anything about role-playing games and he wanted someone who knew them. And one thing led to another, and so we started to work with Studio Giochi, a game studio that wanted to have to deal with all types of games, from role-playing games and board games and crossword puzzles. And it was a huge working process of learning, because we were spending a lot of time together with people like Alexandrov, for example. Alexandrov in particular, he was the classic Euro game designer leaning towards abstract games. One of the main games of his is a masterpiece, Twixt, brain-racking puzzle type kind of games, huge on strategy and so on. But at the same time, he was a sort of a philosopher, so he was always wondering and thinking about and talking about different aspects of life that were not connected simply to designing a good game from a mathematical point of view. And even if he didn't have anything to do with role-playing games, I think that was very inspiring, because it felt appropriate to us who were wanting to design role-playing games, because role-playing games are always thematic games, and so there's always a need to go outside the simple landscape of games. You read books, maybe you're inspired by a book, you want to make a game that is similar to the theme of that book, and so on. So we felt very like-minded with Alex, and I think it stuck with us. And we were lucky enough that eventually Studio Giochi got a commission from one of the major publishers in Italy to do a role-playing game. And it was funny because we were about to leave the studio, because it was not all fun and games. It was a hard trial. It was a hard experience for many reasons, deadlines, and also our boss had a very precise idea of how things needed to be done, so we didn't have much freedom, so we were already thinking we should go and maybe do our own stuff. But at that moment, when we're about to go away, maybe he perceived it. He said, "Oh yeah, but I have this commission to do a role-playing game. Are you really sure you want to go?" And so we decided to stay, and that led to the publication of Lex Arcana. That's a role-playing game that we published in 1993, and it's a role-playing game that has a setting based on a fantastical Roman Empire. We had many challenges at the time when we had to create that, because it was already like 5 or 6 years after the Italian version of Dungeons & Dragons debuted, so the game was already very popular. Role-playing games were the talk of the town, let's say. But we wanted to do something that was different, and because of course a lot of people were doing, I don't mean clones, but games in the same vein of Dungeons and Dragons, different rules, different approaches to mechanics, but in the end the main setting was always a sort of Northern Europe style of fantasy, so a bit Tolkien inspired. Few games made a difference, but the most popular games were like that. And so we thought for long how to be different than that, and Lex Arcana was the result. It was a bit of a dare. We were not sure that the game would be successful. Luckily, we had a very strong distribution, because the publisher was very important, and so the game enjoyed quite a big success. And as with also many games go, it was so popular among a certain group that it stuck with people, so that our names as game designers were associated with that, and it was a big push for our career. Economically, it was not a success. I mean, it didn't we didn't have a fantastic contract, by the way, but apart from that, role-playing games need probably a lot of expansions and stuff to become really, to produce some economical result to the designer. And also, we were 4 designers, because it was actually 3 designers plus sort of a managing element. But and by the way, if you know names of Italian designers of board games, one of the designers was Leo Colovini, who is one of the most prolific game designers for designers games today, Euro games. And because, again, I was saying Venice, strangely enough, has a number of game designers, and one of them, Leo Colovini, was in my older brother's class at school, and we're living like 50 meters away from each other. Must be something in the water. So Lex Arcana wasn't successful economically, almost due to one thing in particular. And maybe if you have been playing games long enough, you can remember that 1993 is about the debut of Magic the Gathering. And Magic the Gathering basically drained all the interest from the wider public that was looking for something like a fantasy game. Everybody started playing Magic the Gathering, to the point that people would find it even difficult to make a difference between a role-playing game and a card game. A lot of people were thinking that Magic the Gathering was a role-playing game. So not a lot of interest around making new games or making supplements for Lex Arcana at the time, so we slowly moved away from the idea of continuing the career as role-playing game designers, even if I, especially Marco, a bit less, Marco Maggi, my co-designer, a little bit was less interested in continuing to play, but I continued to play throughout the 90s and the early 2000s. But again, I was at the time maybe a little bit disillusioned with role-playing games, because in the 90s, apart from a few exceptions, there were more games that came out that were interesting maybe for some ideas in the setting, like Shadowrun or Vampire and the whole World of Darkness. But there was not a lot of innovation as far as role-playing games went from the point of view of the mechanics. We were before some sort of avant-garde started producing things in the States. So games were starting to look too much alike. Like, okay, you have character creation, you have a fighting system, and you have a system for experience, and that is it. That was it, with few exceptions. So yeah, we were starting to be bored about that, but kept playing the classics like Call of Cthulhu or Vampire, a little bit of Dungeons and Dragons. Never been a huge fan of high fantasy, so that wasn't a big part. It was the starting point, but it was not one of the pillars of my gaming experience. So yeah, I moved on designing board games and having a studio jockey close to us and Alex Randolph. We were lucky that they brought us to big game conventions like Essenspiel and Nuremberg, where all the game designers and companies go to promote new games. So Nuremberg is a hobby specialized game fair, not open to the public, only for game designers and companies and distributors. And while Essenspiel is like the Gen Con of Europe, I mean, is the biggest gaming convention. At the time, was especially dedicated to board games. So we started to go there and started meeting people, showing games. And eventually we were lucky enough to find some interest in one of few titles. So we published a few games for kids in general, a few card games. We had a strange game. I don't know if you're familiar with the Tiddlywinks game. It's a plastic chips that you make jump. It's a traditional game, but we made a version of the game that had stickers on them with it was about insect armies fighting each other. So, but even if it sounds silly, it was the game that actually brought us outside of Italy, because we published the game in Germany first, then in France, in different iterations. I think that the game had 3 or 4 editions in different levels of complexity. I'm still unhappy that we never found the best incarnation of that game, because it's very hard to sell a game that is a strategy game but that relies on dexterity, because you need to have manual dexterity to play it. So it's something that doesn't, either for the majority of the audience, it's either a dexterity game or it's a strategy game. It can't be the two things together. So 50% of the people was surprised at finding a strategy game inside a dexterity game, and the other 50% were surprised in finding the opposite. So yeah, it had limited success. But that still allowed us to have a career as game designers part-time, because first we were still studying, then eventually we needed to pay the rent, so to pay our bills, so we started to manage shops. So we were also on parallel managing gaming shops. That kept also some way a contact with the gaming world, and also to test games and so on. So it was always a good way to have one foot on a boat and one on the other. Luckily for us, eventually the necessity of dedicating to one part of the job or the other became clearer when in 2004 we had the publication of War of the Ring. This is quite an history by itself, because you may wonder how 3 Italian designers ended up designing a game on the Lord of the Rings. And it's an interesting story because it has to do with a sort of competition. About 2000 and something, 2001 probably, the movies were out, the movies by Peter Jackson were out, and a lot of companies wanted to create the definitive game on the Lord of the Rings. There were already some. There was already a huge success with the game by Rainer Knizia, the cooperative game, a game that by itself spawned the genre of cooperative games. It was not the first, but it was the one that created all the different, I mean, we have lots now. I remember that Alex Randolph, in his wisdom, he was saying that, yeah, cooperative games, yeah, they are for gentler people, gentle players. I don't know many gentle players. So at the time it was not a thing to do, creating cooperative games. But yeah, Rainer Knizia showed it was possible. But then again, there was not the game we wanted, the game that we would really have loved as Tolkien enthusiasts, because we always have been Tolkien enthusiasts. So way back, like in the early 80s, there was a game called The War of the Ring by SPI. It was a classic war game that tried to combine the story told in the books by J.R. Tolkien with all the war, so all the economics of warfare, plus the adventure part of the game where you have the Fellowship trying to destroy the ring. It was absolutely a myth for us. It was a game that we loved because of its graphics, because of the fact that it tried to do something that seemed impossible. I think, without disrespecting the game, I think it actually didn't succeed, because the game had many problems. It seemed like an unsolved thing. There were too many broken strategies. You could win the game in many ways that were not true to the books at all, or it tried to shortcut a few things, trying to recreate the books, but in a way that was a bit iffy. But anyway, it was absolutely a masterpiece for the time. So when we started fantasizing, but what if there was a game that today was done with the new ideas that are around for board games and so on? But that was just an exercise in dreaming. And because at the time we started playing a few war games that had this novel idea of being card driven. So instead of having a game where you have hundreds of pieces on a hexagon map, and you can move all the counters. So you have hundreds of pieces representing armies, and you have to move all of them every time it's your turn. Card-driven games limited your options to a hand of cards, and those hand of cards tried to represent stuff like fog of war and uncertainty and failed communication and so on. But at the same time, the cards were fantastic in potentially giving you the chance of introducing narrative elements instead of just move this army from here to here. So there were many games. In one in particular, Paths of Glory, was a game that we immediately, when we played it, it's a game about World War I that tells the whole story. I mean, I don't think we ever finished the game, but at least we liked the concept. And we immediately saw that it was possible to do something like that, to combine story and simulation. And so we started thinking we could do this, we could do that. Eventually, Roberto Di Meglio, who at the time was the owner of a company, he came to us by saying, well, you know, I wrote the license owner that was Sophisticated, an English company called Sophisticated Games at the time. They had the rights for games set on in the world of Tolkien. In fact, that the game by Knizia was by Sophisticated Games, and then sub-licensed to different companies. And so it seems that Robert Hyde, the guy owning the company, was intrigued. He immediately said, okay, but you get in line because we have a number of companies interested in doing that. And so what I'm doing now is I will make a tour. I will go to the States, I will go to Germany, I will come to Italy to test the different games that you guys want to propose me. And we didn't know that at the time. We didn't know who was behind this sort of contest, but we would have been very scared if we knew, because one of the companies was Fantasy Flight Games, was like the biggest company in the States at the moment, one that was already being very successful in merging Euro design type of games and American type of games, so big games with lots of stuff and colors and everything, instead of simply games with wooden pieces. So it was stiff competition. Another one was Eagle Games, that was another big game company, and so on. So, but we didn't know, so we felt we had a chance, and we spent at least not more than a month, maybe a month and a half, pouring everything we had and putting together all the things we thought about in years before. And Roberto Di Meglio, for example, he came to us with already a map divided in regions. We came up with the idea of using dice to select actions for players instead of cards. So it was one of those magical moments where everything seems to work. It could have been completely crushed by refusal, but eventually Robert Hyde came to Italy, and actually in Pisa, where we met. We had a prototype. The prototype was like 65% a working prototype. The rest we made up while he was there, because he didn't want to play the game. He wanted to see us play the game. So me and Marco, we played, and what was missing, we were just making up. It seems that we made a good show, because you have to imagine a small flat with a game with plastic pieces. We were using plastic chips to represent the different armies. They were supposed to be miniatures in the final game. And the map was drawn on paper, printed, of course, but I mean, not something you can do today. It was way, way worse. And we offered him lunch by buying Thailand takeaway. So he was eating standing. As a comparison, when he was invited in the States, in one of the companies, I think it was Eagle Games, they sent a limousine to get him at the at the airport. They brought him to a fancy hotel, but they didn't have a game. They only have a cover. They had a cover, a fantastic box, but they didn't have a game. It seems that other companies had games, but Robert Hyde came back to the UK. He said, I will think about it. And about a month later, he said, okay, you have it. And I'm hoping, he said, I'm crossing my fingers, because I am going on this mostly on a hunch. that the game is going to be good, and then you're going to deliver. So yeah, of course, that started a huge series of tests. We opened it up to online with people, especially a simulation games website was fantastic, but Consim World, I don't think it sees much traffic today, possibly it does, but at the time it was a place where all the simulation gamers went, and so we knew that there were people still fans of the old SPI games, so they went on board. And at the time, now today we can test games like making prototypes on Tabletop Simulator, and it's easy to give access to people so they can just start to play immediately. At the time, to play test the game, you needed to print hundreds of cards and print your map and then proxy pieces from other games to play the game. So these guys were fantastic. They play hundreds of games, and it was very important because the game, I don't know if you know it, but it's a big asymmetrical game. So it is very hard to balance a game like that because the victory conditions are very different from one side, of course, the shadow forces and the free people. So yeah, that was a huge change for us because the game was fairly successful. I mean, especially as far as our reputation as game designers went. It's not one of those games like Ticket to Ride that sells hundreds of thousands of games every year, but it is, I mean, 18 years after, it's still on the market and it's still selling well. So I'm not complaining, but it's not the game, it's not exactly a game that you can then say, okay, I'm done with my game design career, I can sit back and enjoy the royalties. You need to do more. We were able to do more, also using the same line of this. We made expansions and so on. But I'm telling all this because this was something that fixed our names as game designers, able to reproduce games connected to a theme, and at the same time, as designers, very well versed in the world of J.R.R. Tolkien. So another rather interesting story can be said about 2009, so 5 years later, when I received a call at 8 a.m. in the morning from a company in Spain who wanted me to design a role-playing game. And as I said during the opening ceremony, I was almost about to turn it down, not because I thought it was a prank call, but because at the time I was full on designing board games. But having designed role-playing games before, I knew how hard it is to design a role-playing game, how difficult it is to write an entire book and to create rules that tell a story and at the same time reinforce the theme and so on. So I was really undecided. Of course, I felt I was in front of a fantastic opportunity, but at the same time, I wasn't sure I could afford the time to do that. Also, again, also for economical reasons, because you never know if a role-playing game is going to pay after all, if it's going to sell enough. Many reasons. Of course, also stage fright, the idea of designing a game on such a beloved property like The Lord of the Rings in front of people that are maybe from the UK or from the US, or in any case an English-speaking country. And so also for a book that is so closely tied to language, that is so English in a way. But anyway, luckily I was probably I don't know if reckless enough, whatever, but I decided to go on. Also because my weak defense was, you should get this guy or this other guy to design it. I had some dream designers in my mind that I wanted them to do a game on the Lord of the Rings that I wanted to play. And one was Greg Stafford, that did the RuneQuest creator, and Pendragon, so the Chaosium designer, that it's my role model, let's say. So at the time I suggested him. But luckily, they'd say, no, we want you. So in the end, I started to do that. It took me about 3 years to do the game. And where with board games, I always worked with Marco Maggi at 50%, basically, or in that case of War of the Ring, 3/3 with Roberto Di Meglio. With the One Ring, the role-playing game, I had to rely basically only on my own strengths, because Marco stopped playing role-playing games way before, so he was less interested. He was more of my sounding board rather than a co-designer. So yeah, I owe him a part of that, but the largest, the heaviest part of designing the game was on my shoulders. It was difficult because we had halfway through a playtesting process that was not promising. I think that in retrospect, the majority of the people that applied to the early playtest were designers who wanted to design the game in my place. And so they were disputing everything, every part of it didn't sit well with them, from what I wanted to have in the book, what the type of approach I wanted. But again, it was like, also for World of the Ring, it was one of the things I spent so much time thinking about that I was very convinced of my ideas. And luckily part of the playtesters went along, and so they started appreciating the stuff I did, and so eventually time ran out, and so I had to deliver, and I delivered. At the time the company was Cubicle 7, and we had a first edition that met some pretty good success. We were since the beginning of a mind not to do a game that could spawn hundreds of supplements, because the concept was always to focus on depth in the game rather than expanding too much. And at the time, probably, I think that my approach to game design as far as role-playing game go was very much about approaching a sort of a sandbox rather than giving you hundreds of pages of pre-written adventures. I wanted to give players the tools of playing the game without relying too much on published material. That it's a stupid thing to say if you want to sell a game, but I was, I think, pretty realistic from the point of view that I couldn't design so much stuff if I wanted it to be appropriate to the world. Anyway, the game in 2009 came out. It was 2009, yeah. It was a good success, but eventually I think that the real change came later on with the Free League version of the game. We had a dispute with the company, with Cubicle 7 at the time. We could not continue working with them, so we were preparing a second edition of the game that was eventually aborted. And so I had a little more time, probably a year more, to think about how to shape the new edition of the game. Eventually, I think that Free League was my ideal company at the time. I was glad to see that when Cubicle 7 bailed out, we had several offers from different companies to do the game with them. Free League wasn't one of them, but I was playing many of their games, and I liked the graphical approach, the care they put into designing the games as products. And so I went to them in one Essen spiel. I approached them by saying, I'm a fan, I'm playing your games. I think that my game would be a good fit for what you do. And so we ended up, they were not offering, but they were not coming to me, but they were very glad I did. So we found a deal, and this led to the One Ring second edition. And now it's already, I mean, there's a number of supplements that we are trying to do, not at a chilling pace, but we are probably going to speed up a little bit, for reasons that I will go into a little bit later, connected to my career as a game designer. But I'm extremely happy how the game it went. I mean, it's one of those works where I don't think I would change anything in its approach. It's very much the representation of what I wanted in a game on the Lord of the Rings. Anyway, why I'm possibly going to speed up publication for this, it is because until late this spring, I had been working for a company called Simon, maybe call me or not. And the success of this game and the success of World of the Ring brought me to their attention. Simon is the company that used to do games like Zombicide, Blood Rage, and huge box games that were mainly sold through Kickstarter. Me and Marco, we were approached a few years ago because they wanted to open a role-playing game section of the company. And they invested a lot, so we were very happy to oblige and work with them. We worked on a lot of projects. Unfortunately, things have gone a little bit sideways for the market in general and for the company too, so much that things changed this spring, and the vast majority of the stuff we did in the last 5 years is probably not going to appear, and that's a bit of a pity because there are a few games I really liked. I don't know if there's a couple of that will appear. That one is Assassin's Creed that I had a part in designing as like concept creator and game design director. I wasn't the primary designer for that, but I was the game design director, and I decided that the premises that should appear at some point, and a couple of others, but. Unfortunately, the company is not in an economical position right now to be certain that those games will appear. And then brought me to again to a sort of a 100% freelance capacity, because since April I've been back. I've been laid off together with other 60 people from Simon. And fortunately, it was not like starting from scratch, because we had already some parallel things going on that we could, because we were not non-exclusive 100%, like 95%. And so we returned again in working for World of the Ring, so there will be more stuff. Oh, by the way, I don't know if you, during the tenure with Simon, one of the things that is clearly visible was we designed the Dune War for Arrakis board game. It's a huge board game originally based on the basic premises of War of the Rings. So there's some elements in connection to that. Unfortunately, I won't be able to design a Dune role-playing game. It's already there. It's there. Somebody else did it already. So yeah, we're back in. It's like dialing the clock back to almost 10 years ago. But as from the point of view of a game designer, working with Simon was extremely useful, because it is completely different to work on a freelance capacity, even if you're working continuously with companies. It is completely different. With Simon, having been a game design manager, I have seen how it works from inside when you're in a big company, and the limits and the opportunities. Because on one side you have huge opportunities due to the budget of games that is completely different from normally what you may think of when you're a freelancer, or if a project is a small one. And so, I don't know, I worked on so many games also simply as developer. I even ended up writing a comic book. And so that's one thing that I never thought could be possible. I worked on the consistency of novels published for the Zombicide line, for the medieval version of the company, of the game, and also the modern one. So it was exhilarating from a point of view, because it's so different. It's so many things you would not end up doing if you work as a freelancer. But of course the limitations are that you are not in charge of your own decisions. I mean, sometimes almost always you have to compromise, and so not always the things go the way you want. Luckily, sometimes they do. For example, with Dune, we were giving a blank sheet. We could decide whatever we wanted for that, and so luckily our reputation as board game designers was enough to guarantee that. And But then it's good to be back with as a freelancer in this moment, because we have lots of stuff in schedule for War of the Ring and the One Ring again. So we will bring the game to places it was not gone before, and also one of the good things about working with companies like Free League is that they are completely dedicated to role-playing games. Even if they did a few things outside the field, they are a role-playing game company. They understand exactly what it means to create a role-playing game, how to promote it, and so on. Okay, so, well, just to wrap things up a little bit, what I wanted to communicate also, or maybe it's part of the conclusion, is that how it feels, let's say, to have made a passion into a profession, and of course I feel extremely lucky to have been given the possibility to do that, because it is, as they say, it is, I mean, it's funny that it's true in both ways when they say that if you do something, if you turn your passion into a job, you're not going to work a day in your life. It's true on one side, but it's also true the opposite, is that if you turn your hobby into your profession, then you won't have any time for your hobby. So you might lose the taste for what you do if you just work on it. But I think that what makes it really lucky, and this could be interesting for anyone who's interested in making this as a career, as a game designer, is that if you can keep up, if you can keep the wonder you had as a player, the idea that you're playing something because it's not simply because you want to reach a goal that is publication or success, but you want to create something that works well for you, so not compromising necessarily to the market and stuff like that. It's going to be much easier and preserve the taste for it. If you try not to think, okay, I should do a game that does this, does that, but possibly today it's better if it does also this, but also this game designer has done that. So if you start thinking too much about finding the right ingredients for the market or the audience, it may be good from the point of view of reaching success. I'm not sure. I've seen that generally you, as a creator in general, you should try to influence the audience and not the other way around. You should convince people that what you've done in a game is the best way for that game, rather than try to guess what the audience thinks is going to be the best thing for the game. That happened for the One Ring, because if you think at the iterations of games based on the Lord of the Rings, one was the Middle-earth role-playing by Iron Crown, and the other one was the Decipher's game by the Lord of the Rings role-playing game by Decipher. They suffered from two things. I mean, Middle-earth role-playing was a huge success for the time. It's a game that shaped a lot of the lives of so many role players. So it was a success. It was a fantastic thing for the period, for the age. But at the time, it tried to combine two things. They wanted to be different from Dungeons and Dragons, and so they had a huge world to pile on. But at the same time, they wanted to be like Dungeons and Dragons. So they added more magic into the game world, where it didn't feel like Middle-earth. Because there was too much magic, too much variety of character types and so on. The Decipher game at the same time was well influenced by the movies at the time, but it was incredibly influenced by D&D 5th edition at the time, and it was so a lot about the possibility of creating diversified characters, having talents and careers and so on, minding a little less what those characters meant in terms of the game world. So my idea, maybe very much influenced by games like Pendragon, by Greg Stafford and so on, was to create the game from the ground up, starting from what was in the world of J.R.R. Tolkien, not compromising with anything. Now we're wrapping up, I think. Maybe there's some time for questions, I think. But I will eventually go into this more with the next chat about designing role-playing games and board games and what's the difference. And so we can see a little bit more about the creation of the One Ring.
Sorry, we don't have time for
Okay. Okay. So thank you.